Hey everybody, this is Ryan McClanahan with HistoryThroughCards.com. Hope you're all doing very well today. While I was at the Lucky's Boston show earlier this year, I was talking to a lot of dealers, looking at a lot of cards, doing the collector thing, and I came across a dealer who had nothing but boxing autographs and a lot of boxing cards. And you know me, I love boxing, probably more than baseball, if that's even possible. I always did, and so while I was talking to this dealer, I must have spent at least 2 hours just talking to him. And he had an amazing autograph collection. He had been collecting since the 1950s and saw a lot of the fights that I research and a lot of the boxers that I collect. And while I was kind of just scanning through his entire collection, I came across this particular card. This is Bert Sugar. It is autographed. Everything on that guy's table was autographed. Unfortunately, I don't think I caught this guy's name, which is really too bad, and it's on me. But he had an amazing collection, and when I saw this, I was like, "Oh my God, Bert Sugar has a card out there, let alone autographed." And so I'm not terribly familiar with this particular card. This is a 1991 KO cards. Not familiar at all. I've never seen this, and I'll show you the back of it. It looks something like that. And so he had a lot of these, and I'm very familiar with Bert Sugar and his career. He's in the Boxing Hall of Fame, but he's really well known to me because he wrote this particular guide. It is the Sports Collector's Bible from 1977. And what I thought I would do today is tell you a little bit about Bert Sugar here and go through a little bit of his Bible here, his price guide. This is a really interesting thing, too, by the way, because there are a lot of hobby pioneers that contributed to this particular thing. I just did a video quite recently on Rich Egan, and he does a section here on early candy and gum cards. And then you have Tom Collier, who is one half of TCMA, which is Tom Collier and Mike Aronson. And Mike also makes an appearance in this particular book as well, as does Frank Nagy and Bob Thing. And I always bump into Bob Thing at least once a year. And I know he's been around since the 1950s. He's still alive. At least I didn't see him last year, but I'm pretty sure he's still alive. I always wanted to talk to him about the early days of card collecting, but I didn't want to. I don't want to pry into his private life. I've kind of tried to ask him several times, in fact, and he just says, that's kind of like in the past, and I kind of leave it at that. But he's got to have so many stories out there about meeting some of these hobby pioneers and just interacting and the cards themselves. I don't think he actually collects cards anymore. I think he sold off his collection. But you also have Ray Medeiros as well and Bill Zekas, who talks about autographs here. So this is a really interesting book, and I'm gonna come back and read some pages from this for you guys, and then obviously Bert Sugar here. We'll get into one of his Irish sports page, in fact, and I think it'll give you a good overview of who he was. And again, he is in the Hall of Fame, and I still have to get to the Boxing Hall of Fame. I know it's moved and it's completely different from what it was. I think initially it was a Ringside Magazine Hall of Fame, and that shut down, and they kind of had to rebuild it back up. So let's get into Bill Sugar's his biography, if you will. Here we go. This is from the New York Daily News, March 26th, 2012. Bert Sugar, ring historian, cigar smoking writer dies at 74 by Tim Smith. Boxing suffered a great loss Sunday when the sport's legendary journalist and historian Bert Sugar died at Northern Westchester Hospital in Mount Kingsco of a heart attack following a lengthy battle with lung cancer. He was 74. Only a few close friends knew that Sugar was battling cancer, and he wanted it that way. The telephone message on his home office phone in Chappaqua still has Sugar's voice saying that he was in training for a comeback. He was ageless, said promoter Lou DiBella. Bert was an older guy, but he was young at heart, young in spirit. He was always up for a good time. He was a guy who was omnipresent. I called him to see how he was doing around a month ago. He was positive. I'd known he wasn't feeling well. I could tell he wasn't well. With his ever present fedora and cigar, Sugar became the indelible face of boxing for the past 4 decades. Though several of his 80s books that he wrote were devoted to baseball, he was also the publisher and editor of Boxing Illustrated magazine and The Ring magazine, and was elected to Boxing Hall of Fame in 2005. Clearly, Bert was unique and created a niche in boxing, said Steve Farhood, Showtime boxing analyst and longtime friend of Sugar. He had an exceptional mind with exceptional recall. He loved boxing and the opportunity that boxing gave him to be Bert Sugar. In time, he became more of a character and face of boxing than some of the boxers themselves. For those who knew Sugar, he was always ready with a quip or a one liner. His knowledge of boxing history was unparalleled, and his recall was instantaneous. His nickname could have been Google. He was that good and fast coming up with factual historical information on boxing and baseball. When you lose a Bert Sugar, you lose a piece of boxing history, said Ross Greenberg, former president of HBO Sports, who, like many involved in the sport, leaned on Sugar for his knowledge of boxing. He seemingly went back to Jack Johnson and John L. Sullivan, Greenberg said. His passing will leave a large void in the sport. He was everybody's go-to guy. The sport has so much history, and it seems it was all in Bert's head. Sugar was born in Washington in 1937. After attending the University of Maryland, Sugar enrolled in Michigan and earned an MBA and law degree. He passed the bar exam but never practiced law. He worked at McCann Erickson and J. Walter Thompson in the 1960s. Sugar got involved in boxing journalism when he bought Boxing Illustrated in 1969. He edited the magazine until 1973. Then, from 1979 to 1983, he became the editor of The Ring magazine. As a journalist, Bert was a talented writer, but he was a terrible businessman, and he knew it, said Farhood, who did boxing ratings for Sugar at Boxing Illustrated. If he was in charge of a magazine, he'd do a great job with the writing, but he did a bad job with the checkbook. The hat, the Panama in the summer, and the fedora in the winter became more of a fashion accessory. It became part of Sugar's legend. I think he showered in that hat, said Ed Schuyler, former Associated Press boxing writer and Hall of Famer. I'm not sure his wife ever even saw him without it. There are many stories about Sugar and his ever present hat. He didn't even take it off for the national anthem. He'd just push it back on his head a couple of inches, Schuyler said. Schuyler recalls the time that a fellow writer, Dick Joyce, took Sugar's hat off and threw it out of a window of a bar on the 20th floor of the New York Athletic Club following a Boxing Writers Association of America dinner. That morning, Dick called me up saying, I had to do it. I had to do it. Schuyler said, I said, what? He said, I threw Bert's hat out of a window of a bar. We took up a collection to buy Bert a new hat. I think we collected more money than the hat was worth. But we all figured some sailor found that hat in the river and was wearing it. He was a very sweet guy and always there for everybody, Greenberg said. It's truly a sad day. The heavyweight champion of boxing writers is gone. Let's get into this real quickly, shall we? Here's the introduction. to the Sports Collector's Bible by Bert Sugar, and this is the introduction. One of my producers on Wild World of Sports recently bought me an issue of the Detroit Free Press with a 2-inch ad which read, "Baseball cards wanted will pay $4 each for style shown." That was the 1953 Glendale Mates. Send any quantity for prompt payment. Other per 1955 baseball cards also wanted. Send list or sample. This small ad placed in the back of the Sunday sports section forcibly brought home by the fact that baseball cards are still as big as they were in my childhood, but now they not only bring back memories, but they bring back money as well. Of course, if the readers of the Detroit Free Press had referred to the Sports Collector's Bible, they would have seen that the card advertised for the F-151 is worth at least $20 each. Seeing this ad shows that little has changed since I grew up, except maybe the prices. These cards beget, but then that shouldn't be so surprising since cards are what originally hooked me on sports, and excitement that they convey is what also they try to communicate each and every week of the year in the wild world of sports. That excitement and flavor of each of us find in our favorite pastime. Now, if I can only figure out how to trade my Howard Cosell card. Rune Arledge, President and Executive Producer, ABC Sports Inc., New York, New York, July 22nd, 1975. This is the preface. You remember how it was when you grew up in the 1930s or 40s after a baseball game on a hot summer afternoon, stepping out of the drugstore across from the vacant lot with a Dixie cup of ice cream in one hand and your baseball glove under your arm. You slowly lift the cover from the cup and peer through the thin film of ice cream on the underside of the lid for a sight of a baseball hat. A quick lick of the tongue takes away the very last trace of the clinging ice cream, and you can now see through the wax wrapper that covers the photograph that is a baseball player, as it looks like Carl Hubble. Yes, it is Carl Hubble. And you run home and add it to your growing collection of Dixie Cup tops that already includes Jimmy Fox and Lefty Gomez. Such were the pleasures of youth, for Dixie Cup tops were our round porthole on another world, a world of excitement, adventure, and glamour vicariously shared through our favorite ball players. This link we have with our latter-day brethren, the bubblegum card collectors of the 1950s and 60s, whose Carl Hubble is Sandy Koufax, whose Jimmy Fox is Hank Aaron, and whose Lefty Gomez is Whitey Ford. Together, we will perpetually remain kids at heart because we were once kids who saved cards and cup tops, and by doing so saved our memories. And today, so many of us who once were kids who incidentally collected are now collectors who are incidentally still kids. We have never outgrown the heroes and the moments that magically transport us back to our childhood when we played games like baseball with an enthusiasm and innocence long since gone, with acquaintances named Fats and Stinky, and dreamt dreams only the young dare to. But while we have lost all our associations with the past, we still have one, our sports mementos, and the many memories they invoke. It is just those trinkets, tokens, and trivia of our lost childhood that have become acceptable to a society which prides itself on its nostalgic past and prizes those objects that best serve to recapture it. So it is that we are no longer closest collectors, but have become into the open to proclaim that indeed we are still kids at heart and proud of it, just as we were proud of being collectors of sports memorabilia. And those trinkets and tokens of our childhood have become the treasures of today, both in terms of the memories they awaken and the prices that they command. There have been many books dedicated to the many memories of sports. Larry Ritter's classic, The Glory of Our Times, and Roger Kahn's widely acclaimed Boys of Summer, And I actually highly recommend that you guys read both of those. They are fantastic. Anyway, I digress. Let's continue. Are but two of them, but no one has yet to put together a basic compilation of all the material collected by sports fans. After trying to capture the full flavor of sports collecting and reduce it to paper, I have come to know why nobody had ever dared tackle a project like this before. It is an impossible task, simply to that which confronted Bear Rabbit. Every time you touch one area of the hobby, you somehow get stuck in another. So it was, after 2 frustrating years of attempting to chart this heretofore uncharted area, that I asked the leading expert in each of the major collecting fields to come to my rescue and attempt to chronicle each and every subsection of that amorphous hobby known as sports collecting, and they all did, each contributing for the good of the hobby and to the making of this book, the official guide to sports collecting. It is these men who, if they ever have a Sports Collectors Hall of Fame, will be my first choice for induction and the choice of every collector who reads and comes to rely on the Sports Collector's Bible. These experts are Larry Frisch in trading cards, Rich Egan in early candy and gum cards, Tom Collier in buttons and pins, Dr. Anton Grobani in books, Robert Thing in postcards, Frank Nagy in matchbook covers, Ray Medeiros in guides, David Paxton in yearbooks, John Sullivan in programs, Mike Ehrenstein in collector's card issues, Ben Weisner in APBA game cards, Duke Hott in uniforms, and Bill Zekas in autographs, combined with Keith Oberman, who assisted me in collating and editing their material. I and all collectors everywhere are indebted to these 14 men who made possible the Sports Collector's Bible. Bert Randolph Sugar, Chappaqua, New York, June 7th, 1975. This is the forward. All my life, I've been a baseball fan. Whenever I was a player, I was a fan. On Old Timers Day at Yankee Stadium, I would scurry around the locker room in my Yankee uniform, begging autographs of previous Yankees. I spent my entire career not truly believing I was actually a big league player. Maybe that's because I never even thought about being a big league player when I was a kid. Al Ferreira of the Dodgers once said he dreamed about being a big league player because he wanted to see his picture on a bubblegum card. For me, dreaming about being a big leaguer was simply out of the question, too magical to even be a remote possibility. It was enough of a thrill just to go on the polo grounds with my brother Bob and root for the Giants, and maybe, even if we were lucky, to collect some autographs. I still have a scorecard from 1952 signed by Sal Yavers, Hank Thompson, and Willie Mays. I take it out and look at it once in a while. It reminded me that my ballpoint pen skipped that day when Willie wrote his name and he scribbled to get it going again and then repeated his signature. So actually, I have two Willie Mays and a half plus a genuine Willie Mays scribble. It's impossible for me to believe that I actually pitched against Willie Mays. I even remember thinking at the time, is this really happening? Am I really pitching to Willie Mays? Hey, Willie, I have an autograph and a half of yours plus a official scribble. I keep that scorecard because it reminds me of my childhood. Fortunately for me, I had an extended childhood that lasted until I retired at age 31. When they tore down Yankee Stadium, I went down to buy some seats from the salvage company. I ended up buying also a turnstile, the bullpen home plate, a clubhouse stool, and a large sign that says "Fans throwing objects or in any way interfering with play on the field will be subject to arrest." That sign now hangs in the den of our home. My wife wouldn't let me hang it in the bedroom. She says I have so much Yankee junk that I could reconstruct Yankee Stadium in our backyard. What I would like to do is reconstruct those Yankee years in my mind. I wanted reminders that I was actually there at Yankee Stadium. Somehow I needed a piece of it to hang on to, something tangible I could look at and hold in my hand. It was the same thing for my brother Bob. After I had been pitching for the Yankees for a few years, he called me up one day and said he suddenly realized I was in the big leagues, and then he brought the newest edition of the APBA baseball game and found my official card inside. He said my card worked too. I had no chances of hitting a home run or a triple, and that sight changed, and only a slight change to hit a double. As I grew older, those days at the polo grounds when I was a kid are no longer as real as that scorecard I keep in my drawer. In the same way, having played the game no longer seems as real as my APBA statistics, my Yankee turnstile, or my bubblegum card. Jim Boughton, New York City, July 7th, 1975. So that's a small look into Bert Sugar and his price guide. I'm not entirely sure how he came up with some of the prices in that guide, and as you can clearly see, that there are no distinct prices for each player. It's just, well, with a few exceptions, maybe Babe Ruth, for example, in which they say you can grab a Babe Ruth for like $20, and I want to think that that's actually true. You could in fact, because in the early 1980s to mid 1980s, it was actually possible to buy a 1933 Gaudi Babe Ruth for like $60. And I've actually heard of at least one case where a buddy of mine who was he's like 5 years older than me or so, and when I was first collecting cards at age 14, he had bought a Babe Ruth from 1933 Gaudi for, I want to say he said $80 or so at auction, and he was a teenager. So obviously it could happen, and I've kind of told you guys that I could buy a lot of key cards and Hall of Famers when I was a teenager that are now really nearly impossible to get my hands on because of the expense. And that just kind of goes to show us how the prices of these cards have just gotten so out of control. And we could kind of dive into why that actually is. It was very easily attainable to grab Hall of Famers even in T206. Your Ty Cobbs, for example, were not going for thousands of dollars. They were going for maybe $100 or less. And that was like in the early to mid 1980s. So it was possible. What I thought was also really interesting here, too, was that they mentioned that the cards themselves are an association of their childhood. And I think that's actually universal to all generations, not just mine, not just the generations that have come after me, but to every generation, in fact, is that they're looking to capture a little piece of their childhood for whatever reason. And this also includes me as well. I may collect mostly vintage, but I do have some cards that are deeply connected to my childhood, and they always will be. And that's also one of the reasons why Jefferson Burdick started the hobby in America, was because the T206 was connected directly to his childhood. And as we age, we tend to revert back to our childhood for whatever reason. Maybe because we have such good memories of our childhood. I know I did. And I think that's a universal trait throughout every generation. I wanted to tell you a little bit about this today, and I want to get your feedback on this and Bert Sugar. And if you know of any other Bert Sugar cards out there, let me know. I really didn't know that he actually had a card out there, and I have to read a little bit more of his articles and see what else I can come up with and find, because he really is an amazing person, and his knowledge of boxing is immense. It really is. Ring Magazine was a really interesting magazine to read. It may be around, I just don't know. Boxing in general has really kind of like gone downhill. It's kind of fallen out of fashion, if you will, for other sports. And there's a lot of associations with the mafia and throwing fights, which has really kind of like soured the sport quite often, in fact. But if you go back uh, to like the 1910s, 1920s, and 30s, and even 40s, and maybe even the 50s, boxing is really a scientific sport, and there's a lot of history. There's a lot of American history as well with boxing, especially in New York, and it ties in a little bit to baseball as well. So I'll get to that in another video. But guys, thank you so much for stopping by. I greatly appreciate it as always. I hope you have a good day, and I will talk to you again soon. Have a good one. Bye.